What's a love-making act that looks fun but is actually disappointing? 1. Using a massage gun as a woman's play toy. Don't try it out, ladies, you'll get bruises. 2. Sometimes really hot girls are not the best love-making partners. Anecdotally, physical appeal is no measure of hygiene or participatory nature. 3. The standing 69. Just leave that shit to the corn stars. It's a nightmare. You're standing there fumbling around trying not fall over and injure one another the entire time, so there's really nothing fun about it. 4. Whipped cream, honey, pretty much anything involving food. Except for a thick pastrami sandwich, that makes for a good mid-coital recharge. 5. Shower lovemaking. It was just a struggle and we're both dumb as fuck, which just made it worse. 6. My favorite lovemaking so far was on the floor on a couple blankets and pillows in front of a fireplace with a crackling fire in the middle of winter. It was so sensual because we turned down the heater to like 65 degrees and it made us want as much skin contact with the other as possible. All lights turned off. Just us and the sound of a fire. Genuinely the most romantic lovemaking, and I had the time of my life. What is the most ridiculous Karen encounter you've ever had? I had just gotten off of my shift and decided that since the weather would be nice over the weekend, I would get a couple of steaks, some corn, and stuff for a cookout with a couple of my buddies. As I am looking at the steaks, comparing cuts before I put one back. When I hear the mating call of a wild Karen, this is a sound that I am familiar with. But, she can't seriously think that I work here. I am in a plain, logoless white polo shirt tucked into my uniform pants and my black boots. The workers here wear black button-up shirts, khaki pants, and a green apron with the store name on it. Managers tend to wear black pants but still have the apron, but with manager on the name tag. Sure enough, it was for me. Since I had ignored her, I earned an even more stern throat clearing directed toward me and then a shrill excuse me. I'm an a-hole, but I also think I am hilarious. This is a horrible combination when facing Karen. It is because of this disastrous mix of character traits that I call back to her. Without a look, absolutely, you are excused, the bathroom is that way, with a gesture toward the sign for the restrooms, before adding, and I am sure they have something in the pharmacy if you need more than that. She says, that is no way to speak to a customer, you didn't even ask what I needed. Now. I interrupted her, look, I don't care. I am not an employee here, I have no duty to help you. I do not look anything like a staff member here. If nothing else, I will return to my shopping. In full banshee shriek she replies, I want your manager, I am going too. At this point, I've had enough. I bellow out, shut your mouth. I am a customer, I don't work here, stop harassing me. The problem with going full Marine drill sergeant when in public is that the general public is not accustomed to the volume level a good yell from the diaphragm can produce, and the tone of voice is very hostile. The bigger problem is when you are using a cane to keep you standing, and it becomes very easy for you to be toppled. And this is exactly what Karen did. She kicked my cane out from under my hand, and I was too far forward to recover and went down like a sack of potatoes. She then started smacking me with her purse and yelling about me assaulting her and needing the police. I don't know if it was 2 minutes or 30 seconds, but it wasn't that long. It just felt like it was a bit because I was embarrassed about how easily I went down and how much it hurt my leg. But at this point, the manager came over and got Karen off of me and helped me up. The whole time Karen was still screaming until she remembered that she had her own phone and called 911, screaming things at me like, I'm calling the police, you're in trouble now, and I didn't ask for you to have intercourse with me. What? The manager looked at me as confused as I was, and I just shrugged. Do you know what is going on? He asks. Yeah, she tried to get my attention. I made a glib remark, she told me to get my manager, then as I was unloading on her, she kicked my cane, and I went down. You saw the rest. Karen chimed in, liar. You felt me up, and then when I pushed you off of me, you hit me with that stick, and if it wasn't for the fact that I hit you with my purse, I'd be dead. At this time, I'm pretty sure the dispatcher had said something to her, as she said into the phone, yeah, he is about 6 foot, a large white man, in a white polo and black pants with boots. Yes, I think I am safe. The manager is here, but he seems to know my attacker. I think he wants to assault me too. The manager and I exchange looks before he asks me, it appears she called the police. Can I ask you to wait in the store? He says to me. Sure, I'll wait. I replied with a nod. It was only a couple of minutes before the cop came walking up. Luckily I knew this cop very well. Her name is Julia, I had trained her when she first joined the force. What is happening here? We got a call about a forced intimate assault. The fact that I was addressed before Karen sent her into orbit. I could see Julia's eyes just glaze over, and since I had trained her when she joined the force, I knew this meant she had already tuned the irate Karen out. I just looked at Jules and said, take her statement, this is the manager on duty, then review the security footage. Karen, being Karen, starts with a, we don't need the security footage. This man assaulted me, arrest him. She also threw this gem out, you're a woman, and you know him, you must know what type of a man he is. You can be honest that he probably has assaulted you too. Julia looked over to the manager and said, I think it would help more if I were to see that footage first. At this point, Julia's partner told Karen that she and I were supposed to stay with him while she went with the manager. Apparently, not only did the security camera catch everything in 1080p, but it also had audio. About 5 minutes later, Julia returned, looked at her partner, and then pointed to Karen. Arrest her for assault and making a false report. Jules then got into Karen's face and said, "I have been assaulted in the past. People like you make false claims that make it so hard for us actual victims to get the help we need." And that was really the end of it. The manager helped me get the rest of my things for the grill out, and I got a nice 25% off coupon. I fell asleep for 25 years. When I awoke, only a few hours had passed. I'm 21 years old, and when I was 15, I had a dream that lasted for what felt like 25 years. My story happened around 6 years ago while I was spending a weekend at my Nana's house. It was a Saturday night, and that day, a friend and I were trying to see who could go down the hill faster on our scooters. I ended up eating it into the concrete at one point head first with no helmet, and though I was skinned up and hurt, the adrenaline had kicked in, and I thought nothing of it. That night as I'm about to fall asleep, I get a splitting headache, but eventually get to sleep through it. I slept for only about 4 hours, but while I was asleep, I had what I can only describe as an otherworldly experience that lasted for what felt like 25 years. In this dream, life went on as usual. I finished high school and went off to college at Western Carolina University. My major was in mechanical engineering. In my very first 7:30 a.m. crack of dawn class at Western, which was a general psychology class, I walked in, looked around and saw this beautiful girl who I ended up sitting next to and hitting it off with. Her name was Camilla Faye Weaver. She was from Asheville, North Carolina and was majoring in elementary education. We instantly clicked, and I ended up moving nearer to her just so we could see each other more often throughout college. I always called her Millie. We ended up with bachelor's degrees in our respective majors and decided to move in together as we searched for jobs. I ended up getting a job at a little engineering firm, Ariel, which is a real place that I have no memory of ever hearing of before this, and she was an elementary school teacher in the county we lived in Southern Virginia. We got married when I was 25. We bought a house when we were about 4 years into our marriage. Lovely comfy tiny family home in Virginia, a good spot right in between our work and our families. We ended up having 2 children, Reese Danielle and David Louis. Our lives were not in any way unrealistically unique. We just had a very everyday, tranquil life. We did have kids somewhat later in our lives than most. We were 33 when we had Reese and 37 to 38 when we had David. But, one beautiful Sunday, August afternoon, I was 40 years old at the time, and it came crashing down. We had just got home from church. Millie took Reese to the store while David was taking a nap. The living room had a large pane window, and in the afternoon, the sunlight would pour through the window so elegantly. I sat in my recliner, the sun beating down on me, and I literally remember thinking, this is perfect. I opened my eyes and noticed that a painting we had up on the wall had gotten slightly skewed, so I went over to fix it. As I was standing in front of it, it completely mesmerized me because something was just off about it. It was odd looking and weird. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, and I remember faintly hearing Millie and Reese get home, and Millie talked to me in what I could tell was an anxious, nervous tone, but it was just a muffled mess of sounds underneath the now blaring ringing in my ears. After some time, she took the kids and left. That was the last time I saw her. She and Reese and David fled, and I never saw them again. I don't know how long at this point I had been staring, but it seemed like it was suddenly dark in my house, and I realized why it was mesmerizing and weird looking. It wasn't real. And as soon as that thought came into my head, it was like I was falling backwards until I remembered I had tumbled face first into the concrete just a few hours before. It was at this point I was in a super calm void. I was warm, and nothing was around me. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or not, and I'm not sure if I either couldn't move my arms or just couldn't tell where they were. Then I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my ears ringing, and my head feeling like someone had taken an axe to my skull. I must have made a noise loud enough to wake up my Nana. I told her my head was absolutely killing me, and she took me to a hospital. The entire rest of that night, as well as the day after, I didn't speak much because I was just trying to process all that had happened. I had a bad concussion as well as a hairline fracture on my skull, where I had hit my head. Hearing it after, I'm not sure how it didn't hurt as bad when it happened. I don't know if I had a near-death experience in the form of a dreamlike otherworldly experience. I just know it was weird. Those who have been cheated on, what makes your story better than the rest? I was able to humiliate her by live streaming the whole thing to her family. Let's start this story by saying this happened 12 years ago. I'm now happily married with 3 children and regret absolutely nothing. I was with my new ex for 3 years. I had noticed that she was being extremely controlling. I was expected to give every little detail of my day and tell her my schedule in advance, and if I deviated from that, she would be very upset. She chalked it up to just bad feelings she was having and shrugged it off as her paranoia for past relationships of infidelity. I had never once cheated or strayed, and I never gave her a reason to act like this. It felt unbecoming of my fiancé to act in such a way. Now this is where it gets juicy. After she had asked for my schedule to make plans, as mine tends to be more hectic than hers, I noticed she was texting someone. In my line of work, if I put in more than 40 hours, I have the ability to take time off at will as long as the work is completed at a later date. I was very good friends with her brother and still am. We laugh about this to this day, and he actively reminds her of it. I messaged him stating I wanted to do something special for her a little bit earlier than our anniversary to make sure it was a special surprise. They both worked in the same fabrication facility. He was a fabricator and she was a shipping manager. He was kind enough to let me know her schedule. That's where the discrepancy falls into place. Without my knowledge, she was foregoing overtime. She worked 12-hour shifts Monday through Friday, with the exception of Wednesday, when she would only work half a day. She had been taking Wednesdays off right around the time that she started getting extremely controlling. Lucky for me, I had stacked several days of leisure time up, so taking a Wednesday off for me was not an issue. A few days go by, and Wednesday's here. I put on my work gear and leave for work. I was expecting her to leave as our apartment complex had 2 exits on the same road I could see directly across from a shopping center, so I parked my car near the back and waited. After about an hour, I noticed a very specific red Mustang with a specific decal on the back window. It was her cousin. I had also done my due diligence to take an old laptop, which we kept on our desk in an office area with a full view of the living room, bedroom door and bathroom plus the kitchen. I had set it up for remote access and had it alert me when the webcam noticed movement. Giving her the benefit of the doubt, I thought he may be dropping something off or coming over to assist her with something, as her family sometimes does. Sure enough, a message came through, so I remote into my laptop. He walks through the door without skipping a beat. She unbuttons his shirt and begins kissing him. I created a URL link for the live stream, and as she was preoccupied, we had a family group text and a friend group text. They were both part of it, but at the current time, they were currently indisposed and didn't look at their phones. They didn't even wait. They could have gone to the bedroom, but no, they decided to get freaky deaky right there on the couch. I sent the link off to the friend group chat and the family group chat. Within minutes, I'm getting calls nonstop from friends and family alike. There was no turning back. She was getting blown up, but she was ignoring her phone. Not until the 4th or 5th call came through did they decide to take a break. For context, the state I live in allows recording of personal property regardless of occupancy. I was the only one on the lease. She wasn't allowed to be on the lease because of poor credit. The call she had picked up was from her cousin's mother who she was banging. She answers the phone on speaker, and I kid you not, the first words out of his mother's mouth were "Stop fucking my son." They both became rigid, and she began to stutter over her words, saying, "What are you talking about?" The mother then divulged that there was a live feed of them sent out by me to her family. She grabbed every pillow off the couch and covered herself up. The cousin staggered off, trying to put on his pants and shoes, just to trip himself up and bang his head off of my coffee table, leaving it with a divot. By this time, I had made my way to the front of the apartment complex. I was there to greet the adulterer as he came out of the front exit. He froze and began to cry, apologizing profusely. I'm not going to lie, what happened afterwards wasn't my best moment, and I nearly got into legal trouble if it weren't for the fact that he was trespassing on private property. Let's just say I had a cast for 6 weeks, and he wasn't in any family photos for months. I went up to the apartment, where she was now fully clothed and crying inconsolably. I asked her if it was snot or cum on her face. Then I told her not to answer because it didn't matter anyway. I gave her 1 hour to remove all her belongings, as again, everything in the apartment was mine except for clothes, some makeup, and a few kitchen utensils. Her mother would not let her move in, as she was just filled with embarrassment. Same for her brothers, and the cousin's mother kicked her son out. Rumor spread around our town very quickly, and for a lack of better words, she was untouchable. Men who've had sugar daddies, what on earth were you thinking? He ended up taking my daddy issues to a whole new level. I've never met my dad. He ran off when my mom found out she was pregnant with me. My brother was only 8 months old at the time, so he also has no memory of him. There are no pictures of him anywhere, and my mom hates talking about him. All I know is that he was emotionally abusive to her and a real a-hole. I have a thing for older men. Call it daddy issues or a fetish or whatever you want, but I pretty much only date or sleep with men 40 and up. My family doesn't know this or that I'm gay, for that matter. It wouldn't be an issue, they just never ask. We don't really share personal things like that. About 6 months ago, I met David at a club. We hit it off great. He's in great shape for his age. Supposedly 43, although that's a lie. He's actually 47, as I've found out. He was really attractive and charming. He left for a 2-week work trip a few days after we met, but we kept messaging each other and I really liked him, which is rare for me. We went on a date after he came back and have pretty much been dating ever since. He has a lot of money and I'm kind of his sugar baby, but that's not the reason I was attracted to him. Definitely A+, though. I didn't tell anyone we were dating except for 2 of my best friends. He also never met any of my friends or family, and I never met him. This changed last night. We were at a restaurant when out of the corner of my eye I spotted my mom. I don't live at home and we only usually text if we need something, so I didn't know she'd be there in there. I still don't know why she was. She hates going out and thinks it's a waste of money. She had not seen us yet, but David noticed me looking at her. I'll forever remember the way his face changed when he saw her. His expression went from his casual, charming smile he always had, to this blank, panicked look I obviously noticed and got a really bad feeling, so I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he just got up and excused himself. I kept asking him where he was going and grabbed him so he couldn't just leave. At this point I was really confused and suspicious, but I would have never guessed what would happen next. I don't think anything could ever prepare me for it. At some point, while he was getting up, my mother must have spotted us because next thing I know she's next to our table asking me what was going on. I couldn't really pinpoint her facial expression because it looked like she was horrified, but again, at this point, David is visibly uncomfortable and looked like he wants to die. He was literally sweating. I assumed this was because he didn't want my mother to know I was dating someone of his age. I was about to try to explain what was going on to my mom when she said, "Why would you go behind my back like this?" It seemed like she was acting crazy for no reason. As a student, what is the saddest thing you have found out about your teacher? In 7th grade, I had a history teacher named Mr. Andrews. He was famous throughout the school for how hard his class was. Mr. Andrews didn't mess around. He expected his students to do the work he assigned, no shortcuts. And he assigned a lot of work. Even though his class was tough, Mr. Andrews was a great teacher. He went above and beyond what the required course material was and gave really long, yet animated lectures, making the weirdest things interesting without losing our attention. He knew his stuff, which is something rare for public middle school teachers. History was genuinely his passion and he wanted to share that with us. Every Friday he'd bring out his guitar and sing traditional folk songs for us. The whole class would sing along, and it was a relief from the stress of all our other classes once a week. Still, his policy of assigning huge amounts of homework made him somewhat unpopular. Most students had mixed feelings about his class, myself included. One day, totally out of the blue, we took a break from our usual lesson plan. This was nearing the end of the year. Our middle school's guidance counselor was in the room, looking somber. As the bell to signal the start of class rang, she began to tell us how kind it is of Mr. Andrews to do this every year, and that we should be very respectful. She stepped aside and let Mr. Andrews begin to talk. A picture of 3 young adults was on the screen in front of class. Mr. Andrews told us those were his 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. He told us stories about his children when they were growing up, and how his son loved breakdancing. We were all confused at this point, but we knew that this was serious, so we listened attentively. He fast-forwarded to the future. His eldest daughter was getting married. One Wednesday, he got a call from his daughter, very seriously, telling him to come home. He thought there might have been a slight hitch in the wedding planning, so he wasn't too concerned. But when he arrived home, he saw a bunch of police cars outside. Mr. Andrews went into his home and told us the last thing he could consciously remember was an officer telling him, "Mr. Andrews? We found your son inside his home deceased from what appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His son took his own life." Mr. Andrews said he didn't notice any warning signs. A week before he passed, he told his father he wanted to go to college to become a history teacher. Following his passing, it came out that he had a fiancée that no one knew about, but it was a complete shock to her too. The entire time Mr. Andrews told his son's story, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move or make a sound. I could hear the emotion in my teacher's voice. I could tell which parts were the hardest for him to get to, when his voice broke and he took long pauses before continuing. I could hear which parts would be ingrained in his mind forever. The story was so painful for him to relay, but he still told his students every year because he wanted us to know the effects that self-harm has on a family and a community. He wanted us to know that we can, and must, ask for help. I will always remember his story. From that day forward, I had nothing but complete respect for Mr. Andrews. Those with spoiled siblings, when did your parents realize they terribly messed up? I have a brother who is about 6 years younger than me. He was excessively coddled by my parents due to being diagnosed with high-functioning autism at the age of 4. Other than that, he seems very normal, just unbelievably spoiled. He would use his privileged position to get his way most of the time, and by most, I mean nearly all the time. Whatever I had, he also had to have, resulting in us having duplicates of almost everything except shared items. And anything he had that I didn't, he'd rub in my face however he could. When I was 11, I pleaded with my parents for a 3DS for my 12th birthday. I got one, but then I was told to lend it to my brother whenever he wanted it, or else they would take it away from me. Which it was, a lot. When my aunt witnessed my parents forcibly taking my 3DS out of my hands to give it to my brother during one of her visits, she let loose on them for such blatant favoritism. They returned my 3DS immediately, then blamed me for the situation after my aunt left. They didn't make me give it to my brother again. Instead, a few days later, my parents went out and bought another 3DS as a surprise gift for my brother. On several occasions, including mine and other people's birthdays, my brother would throw a tantrum because the party wasn't entirely about him. He would go as far as outright stating that he was upset because he wasn't receiving any gifts or getting to blow out the candles on the cake. My parents learned the hard way that they couldn't enable my brother's behavior at those parties and were actually kicked out of a few for attempting to do so. As a result, other kids at his school stopped inviting him to their birthday parties altogether. For me, my birthdays were some of the only days where I could have the focus on myself. Otherwise, my parents forced my life to revolve around my little brother. The year prior to the incident I'm describing, my parents ended up paying more attention to him throughout my entire 13th birthday. They even asked me if I would let my brother blow out my candles for me because he was upset and pouting. I refused because I wanted to blow out my own candles. At first, they called me a spoiled brat until my aunt intervened and chastised them for their favoritism once again. She pointed out how my brother got nearly everything between the two of us just because he's autistic. My parents received no support from anyone else present, except my brother who was still crying because he wasn't getting to blow out my candles. Because he didn't get his way, he tried to spit on my cake out of spite. Fortunately, my awesome aunt blocked him before he had the chance and scolded him until he ran to my mom in tears. My parents faced a lot of criticism from the other adults there, and they promised never to ask me to let my brother blow out my candles again. However, for the rest of the party, they mostly just went through the motions. My aunt pretty much took over coordinating everything from that point on. A couple of weeks before my birthday the following year, my parents sat me down and informed me that they would still get me some gifts and a small cake. However, my birthday party was effectively cancelled to avoid my brother having another meltdown. I told them I couldn't believe they were doing this to me, and they just seemed to shrug it off without a care. So, over the next week, I told my friends, teachers, and even my school counselor about the situation. All of them were appalled by my parents' lack of consideration or empathy. The vice principal even found out and consoled me. Through social media, news of the situation reached my parents. As a result, they grounded and gaslighted me for telling so many people. But that still didn't stop me. I then started telling everyone at school that I was grounded for being upset. This worsened the situation because several parents contacted them, basically saying, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Suddenly, I was ungrounded, but I didn't receive an apology. My dad simply walked into my room with his arms crossed, informed me that I was ungrounded, and then walked out. That was it. I thought my party was still cancelled because nobody said anything about it. My brother found it hilarious and taunted me about not getting to celebrate. However, by the end of the 2 weeks, my parents held a surprise party for me at my favorite restaurant. They started claiming that was their intention all along, but I knew it wasn't true. From what I had seen, everyone was incredibly unhappy with them for what they did, and it showed in their interactions with my parents. So, they ended up throwing the surprise party to try and salvage what little of their reputations they had left. But I'm pretty sure they had to spend a significant amount of money that day just to accommodate me. I had dinner with all my friends at my favorite restaurant, which had a small arcade. I even received the PS4 gaming system that I had been yearning for at that time. I could tell it was all pretty much planned and bought last minute. My dad had a look about him that my aunt comically described as looking like a moth had flown out of his wallet. Of course, my brother made a huge fuss about me getting that surprise party. But with so many of my friends and their parents present, my mom and dad finally put their feet down with my brother. This time around, they stopped his tantrum when he wanted to push my cake off the table. For the first time since he was a toddler, my brother received a timeout, and my mom had to stay with him to ensure he didn't do anything crazy. He tried several times to run toward the cake or the stack of presents, but there was always at least one adult on guard. Even my dad stood watch to keep him away. My mom ended up having to take my little brother to a nearby McDonald's so he could have fun in their play area. I later heard that she spent at least an hour trying to get him to come out of the play structure. He only came out because he needed to use the bathroom. Then he tried to run right back in again. While I still lived with them, my parents never attempted to cancel my birthday again. However, they never again put in as much effort or spent as much. For the remaining 4 years I was under their roof, my birthday parties consisted of a local pizza parlor, a cake without even my name written on it, and no gifts. I don't mean to sound spoiled, but I was somewhat disappointed that I never received a cake with my name on it again. Each year, my aunt called my parents out on that, and each year they claimed they had forgotten to get the cake decorated. I suspect the reason my name was never written on another cake was that my brother always refused to eat pieces of cake that had someone else's name on it at any party. They couldn't put his name on any of my cakes either, as it would have looked very bad for them. Nevertheless, the fact that I still had a day that was solely about me and not my brother was fantastic in my book, especially considering that everything else revolved around him. During each of my remaining birthday parties while I still lived at home, my brother would create a fuss, and my mom would take him somewhere else to calm him down. I was still required to share my PS4 with my brother, but it was still mine. I took it with me when I moved out at 18. My little brother did not appreciate that and threw a huge fit until my parents went out and bought another PS4 for him. When I moved out, my parents finally had to confront the consequences of raising my brother to be so spoiled because I wasn't there to assist them with him anymore. On his recent 14th birthday, he went into a rage at our parents for not getting him a PS5. He is now currently grounded for I don't know how long after causing hundreds or maybe even thousands in collateral damage during his rampage. He picked up a chair and started smashing anything in front of him with it. When I last saw my parents, they appeared mentally checked out. My aunt has also informed me that they confided in her about how they wish they could send my brother to a military or boarding school in the future because they can no longer handle the monster they created. However, they are unable to afford such an option. I would be lying if I said I didn't find it ironically funny.
What is the most bone-chilling, inconceivable thing a parent has done to you? My husband and I got married in 2002 and had our son, Brian, 10 months later. In May 2004, we welcomed our twin girls, Mary and Lisa. My family was beautiful. Every time I took a picture of us, we looked like the families in the stock photos you can Google. However, I can no longer look at the pictures of us because it makes my stomach churl. When my twin girls were born, we had no issues in the hospital. They were born right on their due date, and passed all their postnatal tests with stellar stats. But when we got home we noticed that Mary was developing a rash. I hadn't really dealt with allergies in kids since my son didn't have them and neither did any child or adult in my entire family. I wasn't sure what it was. I thought that maybe she just had sensitive skin like me. It took 3 months to figure it out. During that time, her allergic reactions got more and more severe. Eventually, we figured out Mary was allergic to coconut. The doctors told us that it was a particularly rare allergen, so it wasn't on any of the skin test panels they ran. When we found out what she was allergic to, we were relieved. So relieved. You see, when I was a kid, my mother would put coconut oil in my hair all the time. It looked greasy as hell. I hated it, and once I was old enough to start doing my own hair, I never put that stuff in my hair again. Imagine the irony when I found out I had a daughter with a severe allergy to the one thing I hated my entire life. We told my mother, and she laughed as well. She made jokes about how my baby must have heard me talking about my hatred for coconut oil while she was still cooking inside me and decided that she needed to hate it too. We all had a good laugh and left it at that. Or so I thought. My mother and I have always had a contentious relationship at best. We got along well enough, but we vehemently disagreed on certain topics. As far as raising my kids, my mother was hands-off and respected all of my decisions, even if she didn't like them sometimes. The only thing she continually got on my case about was the coconut oil thing. You see, my girls had very textured and curly hair. It was a little on the rough side, and my mother always insisted that a little bit of oil would make the curls soft and more defined. I always said no. I cannot understand how she did what happened next. I was giving a midterm that day to my students, and I had to be at my research lab late that night. My husband was away at some conference, and our nanny was down with the flu. So, I had my mom come take them for the day. My son was almost 3 years old, and the girls were a year and a half old. Overnight visits with my parents weren't exactly common, but they weren't unusual either. They had always come back from these visits very happy and well taken care of, so I had no second thoughts about leaving them with my parents. They spoke to me on the phone after their lunch, and then, around 5 p.m., we video chatted. The kids were also happy and healthy. I got home around 10:30 p.m. that night and called my mom to see if the kids were up by any chance so I could say good night. I missed the kids by about 20 minutes. They'd already gone to bed. So, I talked to my mom for a little bit, but she's a pretty early sleeper too, so we hung up and went to bed. I woke up around 5 a.m. the next morning to go pick up my husband from the airport at 6. I picked up my husband, and neither one of us was very hungry yet, so we thought it'd be a nice treat to pick up the kids first and go to brunch with my parents. We got to my parents' house at 7:45 a.m. My parents weren't there. My son was at the neighbor's house and ran outside with the neighbor as soon as he saw his daddy and me pull up. He was hysterical and crying, and I couldn't calm him down. My blood pressure was rising because now I'm thinking that something horrible had happened to my parents. My neighbor tells me that she isn't sure what's happening, but there was an ambulance at my parents' house at 6 a.m. My dad had run over and woken them up to see if they could watch my son for a few hours until he got back. Of course, they'd said yes. I'm calling my parents non-stop at this point, and I'm getting frantic because I don't know what's happened. My son was still crying, but he was calmer. He still couldn't really explain to me what had happened, though. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next, but somehow we figured out that the ambulance was from a hospital nearby. We broke several driving laws trying to get there. We got to the hospital, pulled into the emergency entrance that was for ambulances only, left the car, and bolted inside. A few nurses took notice of us immediately and were asking us what was wrong. I was calmer than my husband at this point, so I explained that I didn't know. I told her my twin girls and my parents were here somewhere. I'll never forget the look on that nurse's face. She knew exactly who I was at that moment, and she was about to cry. Another nurse took me and my husband to an empty room. They asked us to calm down and listen to the doctor before we went to find my family. My mother had put coconut oil in both my daughter's hair when they were playing the previous day before bed. The girls loved it when my mom did their hair, so they had asked for braids, and my mom accepted. She put coconut oil in both their hair because it would make for smoother braids. According to my son, Mary started to get a little dizzy and itchy when my mom was doing her hair. So my mom gave her some kids' Benadryl, which made her sleepy. Since it was close to bedtime anyways, the kids then went to bed. Giving her Benadryl was something we did whenever she had a mild reaction since it usually meant she accidentally came across some coconut from a secondary source. We also showered her from head to toe immediately to erase any lingering traces of it. My mother simply gave her some Benadryl, kept the coconut oil in her hair and put her to sleep. The Benadryl made her sleepy and unable to wake up or be conscious enough to wake up her brother or cry. She vomited in her sleep, and the rash spread all over. Her little body was swollen to twice the size. She had asphyxiated in her sleep. She died painfully and slowly in the early hours of the morning. My mother had found her when she went to check on the kids in the morning around 7 a.m. She was already dead by then. My mother screamed, called for my dad, and that's when they went to the hospital. My dad hadn't known about the coconut oil until my mom explained. To this day, I've never seen my father so angry. At the hospital, he was unable to look at my mother, out of fury, or me, out of shame. They had rushed to the hospital hoping there was some way to save Mary and to get Lisa checked out immediately since he thought she might have a mild allergy as well. I can't even explain to you the emotions my husband and I felt. I remember seeing my little girl and just being in denial. There was no way that she was gone. This had to be a horrible, horrible nightmare. The following days, the funeral, and explaining to my other kids what had happened are events I still can't talk about. It just breaks a part of me. My mother was investigated, as was my entire family. I almost lost my kids to my country's version of CPS once because they thought my kids were in danger. My husband and I had to fight tooth and nail to show that uprooting them during this time would be the worst thing for them. My mother was never arrested. My father did leave her, though they're not officially divorced. It's been 13 years. Brian just got his license this year, and Lisa is going to start high school soon. Both of them are healthy and turning into amazing adults. I don't think I could ever recover from the loss of my daughter. We miss her so much.